The time is now.
I won't let you out of my sight. I'm alive.
What's up, world? I hope everyone has had a blessed week, but we're here once again, going in, Talking the Truth Thursday. Say it with me, Talking the Truth Thursday. Let's get it. Okay, so for the past few weeks, we've been talking about game changers. And last week, we talked about Paul and Silas's imprisonment and how important it is for us to keep our hands to the plow, that we cannot think about looking back. We cannot think about moving our hands from the plow, because it can not only be detrimental to us, but also detrimental to other people. And today what we're going to do is we're going to continue in the same lane, but today we're actually talking about Peter's imprisonment. We're talking about Peter's imprisonment, but I really want you to lock in today, because we're going to take these two stories and run them alongside each other, because there's so much we can get that will help us in our walk. There is so much that is in common with these two stories that will help us in this purpose walk that we are on. And we can start with the obvious. We can start with the obvious, that they were in prison. Paul and Silas were thrown in prison. Peter was thrown in prison. Now we talked about Paul being an apostle of Jesus Christ. Well, Peter was an apostle of Jesus Christ. They were pivotal figures in the building of the church, the acts of the church. Peter is what we would call the New Testament pastor, the New Testament church pastor. And Paul is responsible for writing a lot of the New Testament. But regardless of who they were, regardless of their purpose, regardless of their position, they still were thrown in prison. These men were assigned by Jesus Christ, and they still faced adversity. So why do we think we are not supposed to experience anything? Why do we think if they were assigned by Christ and they were thrown in prison, so why do we think we are not supposed to experience anything? I don't care if you're a teacher, a minister, a pastor, a worship leader, you will experience adversity. You will experience a frustration. You will be faced with high days, but you will also have some low days. You will experience being overlooked. Paul and Silas were pivotal figures. Peter was a pivotal figure in building the church, and they were overlooked. You will be faced with adversity. The Bible says we will face trials and tribulations. And understand, there's no way around it. There's no way over it. You can't go underneath it. The only way to get through it is to go through it. The only way to get through it is to go through it. These two were pivotal figures. They're responsible for writing books in this Bible that we study every single day. They were inspired by God to write books in this Bible, and they were faced with adversity. So we have to understand that we will be faced with adversity, but we have to keep our hands on the plow. So let's dive in. Let's really dive into the story of Peter. Now, what happened is in Acts chapter 12. But what happened was James had just been executed with a sword. He's been executed with a sword. And for those who don't know, that means that he was beheaded. James was beheaded. And the king at that time, he seen that this pleased the people. So he seized Peter. He seen that it pleased the people. James's execution, his downfall, pleased the people. Now, remember last week, we said the people joined in attacking Paul and Silas. And James's execution pleased the people. So what that tells me is that just as many people as you have in your corner, there are also people rooting against you. Just as many people that you have rooting for you, there are also people hoping on your downfall. These people they helped attack Paul and Silas, and they cheered on. They rejoiced James's downfall, his execution. So Herod, what he does is he seizes Peter. And now Peter is next to go on a chopping block, but the king Herod, he decides to wait after the Passover feast. And that's a whole nother topic right there. But he decided to wait after the Passover feast. So Peter is now escorted to prison by 4 squads of soldiers. Not 1, not 2, but 4 squads of soldiers. And once he gets to prison, he is connected to 2 squads of soldiers. He's chained 2 soldiers on one side and the other, while 2 more are keeping the door. Now, why does the enemy have to make sure? Why does he go to great lengths to keep you secured? Maybe it's because the enemy knows what you're capable of. See, Peter had escaped prison miraculously once before, and the enemy knew what he was capable of, so he went to great extent to keep him securely shut up. The enemy knows what you're capable of, and maybe he's trying to keep you from walking in purpose, from walking in your calling, because he knows once you step up, by the power of God, you have the ability to make hell more empty. The enemy knows what you're capable of. So what he's going to do is he's going to try to throw this at you. He's going to try to throw that at you and throw this at you and try to keep you so filled and so busy with life that you lose sight of what matters. He wants you to focus on the wall of Jericho and not focus on the God that promised you will overtake Jericho. The enemy wants you to focus on the doing the work and not the one who blesses the work. He doesn't want you to stay connected to God. So Peter is in prison, right? He's in prison, and it's the night before he's to go on the chopping block. And notice what Peter is doing. Peter is asleep. Notice what he's not doing. He's not worried about what's going on around him. He's not worried about what may happen in the morning. He knows his head may go on a chopping block, but he's asleep. He's not focused on what doesn't matter. But the text says, when Peter was in prison, the church was fervently praying for him. And that's the common denominator. That's another thing that's in common with these 2 stories that will help us. What's your prayer life like? The text said that Paul and Silas were praising and praying, and the church was fervently praying for Peter. Because when you add praying with plowing, it brings power. When you add praying with plowing, it brings power. Let's connect the 2. Let's really connect the 2. Okay, so they were apostles. They experienced adversity. But the common denominator was prayer. The common denominator was prayer. Paul and Silas was praising and praying, and it said the doors just blew open. The church was praying for Peter. And before you know it, an angel of the Lord showed up, led Peter out of prison, out of the city, where they came to an iron gate. And this iron gate, what it represents is, on one side of it, where Peter was at currently, is where you used to be. And on the other side is where God is leading you. This gate represents what stands between you and being who God has called you to be. But watch this. The text didn't say Peter had to push it open. It didn't say he had to try to force it open. It said that the gate open on his own accord. And maybe you have been faced with adversity. Maybe you feel like you have been plowing for years and nothing is happening. You've been studying for years and nothing has changed. You've been working for years and nothing has changed. Every time you start plowing, something always happens. There's always some resistance. It doesn't matter what you do or how hard you try. You always seem to come to a locked door. Well, the text tells us that God will cause the door to open on his own accord. If you add prayer with plowing, it brings power. if you just take it to God, because remember, game changers don't do things by themselves. They don't make things happen by themselves. It's with the help of God. And I don't care what it is. If you just take it to God, God will cause doors to open that have been closed for years. He'll cause locked doors that have been locked for years to open on its own accord. You don't have to push at it. You don't have to force it open. It will open on its own accord. And many of you have heard it said before. When God opens the door, no man can shut it. But watch this part. Because the enemy will try to keep the door closed. He will try to keep the door shut. But we learn in Paul and Silas's story that if the enemy does try to, when it comes to you fulfilling your purpose, God will rip it open if he has to. When it comes to you walking in purpose, God will blow the door off the hinges if he has to. But we have to be willing to keep our hands to the plow. Peter, after he gets out of this gate that opened by itself, he goes to the place where the church has been praying for him. And at first they didn't receive him well. They really didn't think it was Peter. But once they realized it, it said that they rejoiced. They were celebrating. But Peter basically said, shh, it's too soon to celebrate. Go tell the others what just happened. Go tell the others that God has freed me from prison. Notice how he kept his hands on the plow. He was hours away from his head going on the chopping block, but he still continued to spread the gospel. He still continued to move the gospel forward, even though it caused him to be thrown in prison and to face execution. You cannot take your hands off of the plow. And in order to keep pressing, to keep moving forward, regardless of the resistance, you have to be willing to add prayer with your plowing, because when you do that, it brings power. Game changers. Let's not quit. Let's not give up. What's your prayer life like? How are you communicating with God? Or have you become so bogged down, so busy with life that you have no prayer life? Game changers make things happen. They get things done with the help of God.